Okay, we're ready to begin. Hold on tight. Last week we explored dreams in Judaism, and we saw that Torah and Talmud expound deeply on the topic of dreams and has strategies and a position. And the same thing we'll discuss astrology. A few jokes about astrology. They say, but you have to know astrology to get some of these jokes. A guy comes to the doctor and he says, I think I'm obsessed with astrology. What should I do? Doctor says, tell me, what are the signs? So, they say believing in astrology is very dangerous. There's a 1 in 12 chance of cancer, if you get astrology. Right. So, but seriously, about astrology, I'm skeptical because I'm Scorpio, and of course Scorpios are skeptical. Okay, so so let us begin our discussion about astrology today, and we'll find out Torah's position. Is it fact or fiction? Before we begin, let us take a short poll and try to just read the position of everyone in the crowd here on astrology. So, first of all, if I offered you a device that can tell you the future, would you take it? Here, I give you a pill. You swallow the pill, you know the future. No, you wouldn't take it. If you were told that you could know one thing about the future, what event would you like to know?
When am I moving to Florida?
When the Messiah comes.
When what? When Mashiach will come?
Mashiach will come.
Okay. Very good. Okay.
When,
Do you think knowing when Mashiach will come will be motivating or restricting?
Motivating.
Motivating. Okay.
I'd say restricting, because if it was far in the future, you could lose hope or not feel as hopeful.
I don't see it that way.
These are actually this debate that you're having right now actually happened with Jacob before he passed away. He was going to tell his children about when Mashiach would come, and God hid it from him at that moment because God wanted it to be a secret. Okay, so now, do you believe in destiny and preordination, that things are meant to be?
Yes, but I also believe in changing your destiny with actions.
Good. Okay, and finally, do you believe in astrology, the power of astrology?
Yes.
Joe?
No, not really.
person sign,
Yeah. Well, whatever astrology means to you, I guess, and then we'll go into different types of astrology. What do you say? You would say yes? You agree?
Okay.
Okay. So for those that believe in astrology, they're actually a good company. Here we get a sneak peek of next year's courses, by the way. In the fall, we're doing the world of Kabbalah, revealing how its mystical secrets relate to you. Winter, the Lubavitch Rebbe's guidance for leading a more purposeful life, called Advice for Life. And in the spring, Decisions of Fate, guiding Jewish values for making life and death decisions. So I'm excited about those topics, but we'll have to wait a couple months until we get to those courses. Okay, I wonder what the signs say. Okay, so now we're signs here. It's stars and signs. So belief in astrology amongst you as the adults is 18 to 29-year-olds. And basically, you see between 18-year-old and 40 are stronger believers. The older you get, the more skeptical you get about astrology. Whoops. But in general, we see a pretty substantial, about 30% of, about a third of Americans believe in some power of astrology. Okay, so we're going to watch a video and it's going to go through some astrology basics to get us comfortable.
What is Judaism's position on astrology? To answer that, a little intro is in order. Astrology is the belief that each celestial item that makes up the furniture of our skies has a direct influence in one way or another on planet Earth and its human population. Now, there's a lot going on up there, but as far as astrology is concerned, we can group it all into two categories. Of all the countless stars, astrologers are fascinated by 12 specific clusters or constellations. If we draw imaginary lines in the sky, like a child drawing dot to dot, these clusters turn into simplified images. Why are these clusters meaningful to astrologers? Because they belong to a region of the sky that is directly in the path that the sun takes during the course of a year. If we imagine the sun to be a giant pointer, it draws attention to a different constellation each month. So nature itself appears to highlight the importance of specific clusters at specific times. Astrology refers to the constellations as zodiac signs, and the region of sky they occupy as the zodiac belt. Beside the stars, which occupy fixed positions, there are also celestial bodies that move through our skies and are said to wield influence. 7 of them are close or bright enough to be visible to the human eye, and were therefore known to the ancients, who treated them as a complete set. Now, the exact positions of the constellations and planets is highly significant to astrology in at least 3 ways. 1. Birth. This is a one-time calculation. The astrological reading at the moment of your birth says a lot about your personality and life. 2. Events. This is a relationship between the stars and planets and large-scale events on planet Earth. Wars, wealth, tsunamis, famines. 3. Activity. This is a way to determine which activities are likely to be successful based on their timing. Certain astrological signs suggest that beginning a specific activity at that time is highly advisable, while to begin other specific actions would be disastrous. So, where does Judaism stand on all this?
Okay, we're going to pause the video and we're going to come back to the rest of the video later. But where do you think Judaism stands on astrology? If you were to give your hunch and say, I think astrology has no place in Judaism or is a deep foundation of Jewish principles. If you were to raise your hand, what would you think? We'll start with the skeptics. No place for astrology in Judaism. Raise your hand. Okay, we have 1 vote. Is a deep core principle of Judaism. Raise your hand. 4. It's complicated. If your position is it's complicated, raise your hand if you think it's complicated. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we have a change of a vote. Okay, so we see there's a skeptic, believers, and it's complicated. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. We're a good crowd. So let's take a moment to go into our book and we'll look at some of the systems that are used in Jewish astrology. So let's take a look at page 46. And in 46, you see a system of astrology that's found in Talmudic sources. In general, you have astrology that's based on the hour, astrology that's based on the day, and astrology that's based on the month. So what are the systems based on? And we're talking about the way they're described in the Talmud. So it might line up with modern astrology, it might be different. The hour is you take the 7 visible planets, including the moon and including the sun. You take the 7 planets and you start off the beginning of the week. Every hour gets 1 planet. Okay, so that means, and the Jewish week starts on Saturday night. It starts with the nighttime. Saturday night is the beginning of the week. So as soon as Shabbat ends, you make Havdalah. The first hour gets the first planet. And then you continue going through the list of 7. After you get to 7 hours, you just continue, you restart the cycle. And you continue out that throughout the week. And it's exactly consistent. That means every Saturday night begins with the same exact planets. And that's how you know which astrological sign. So that's a system that you're seeing on page 46. Okay, it begins on Saturday night. And you have Mercury, the Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, and Venus. Then there is the daily astrological sign. And the daily is basically look back at the chart. Look back at the chart on page 46. You'll see what is the first sign on Sunday morning. What is the first sign?
Jupiter.
The sun.
Sun?
The sun. Yeah, the sun. So what is the sign for what is the planet that's strongest on Sunday? Is the sun, because that's the primary planet. And now you know where the name Sunday comes from. Okay, what's the primary planet of Monday? The moon. Now you know where Monday comes from. What's the primary planet of Tuesday? Mars. And how do you say Tuesday in Spanish or Italian? Martes. Same as the planet, Mars. Okay, so in other languages, Tuesday is Mars. Okay, Wednesday is Mercury. Sounds good to me. Mercury is also the way you say Mercury, and that's how you say same root word. Okay, very good. And Thursday, Jupiter. How do you say it in what? Judy? Okay. And then the sign for Friday is
Venus.
is Venus. And if you can guess, Saturday is Saturn. Very good. So now you know the daily astrological sign is based on the planets. And finally, you have the monthly Mazelot, and that's based on where you're standing on Earth. You know, the sun cycles Earth every 24 hours. But when it does its full cycle, it actually moves a little bit in the opposite direction. I'm talking about if you're observing if you took a still picture, one picture every day at the same time, you'll see that the sun is moving in the sky a different direction. And it takes 365 days till it repeats to the same starting position. So based on every 30 days, it's moving a certain amount of degrees in the sky, and it's pointing at a certain constellation of stars. And those constellations are called the Mazalot. Mazal or Mazalot are those groups of constellations, which has those names, Scorpio and all the Latin names, Greek names I'm not familiar with. I'm more familiar with the Hebrew names, and that you can see in, I guess, the other page of 46, the other side, which is Nisan is Tle, is sheep. If you can think of a connection of sheep to Nisan, what's the connection of sheep to Nisan? The Paschal
Korban-
lamb,
Korban Pesach.
right? The Carbon Pesach, very good. And then the month of Iyar is connected to Shor, to an ox. That's when in the month of Nisan, we're the recipients of God's blessing. So we let God take charge. We're like sheep. We're just following what God says. We're following God into the desert. But then in Iyar, we're counting the Omer. We're working on ourselves. That's like the Shor. We're more dominant in the relationship. God doesn't really do any miracles in the month of Iyar or any special events. But then we get to Sivan, and that's when we make a marital contract with God. And that's like twins. We're both key players in the relationship, God and the Jewish people. So here's some of the things. Can you think of any Jewish customs that are connected to astrology? So there,
What about Kiddush Levana? Blessing of
So-
the moon, the first
so there,
moon.
so that's not
New moon.
necessarily astrologically based, that's astronomically based. So the mitzvah is that there's a special blessing we recite when the moon is on its rebirth. Every month, the moon is on its rebirth. So between day 7 and day 15, we say a blessing is printed in the prayer book, a blessing for God granting us the moon, and it's prayer for protection. And it's customary. I haven't seen women do it. I don't know if it's specifically not a woman thing, because women are already associated with the moon so heavily, so they don't have to go out of their way to make the blessing of the moon. But it's known men do it all the time. Okay.
What about the blessing on the sun? Like, what is it, every 7 years or
Blessing
something?
The blessing of the sun is every 28 years.
28
and that's
years.
every 28 years. There's also, like the blessing on the moon, every 28 years there's a blessing on the sun. But that's more astronomical based. That's not astrological. But here's an example. When, or before we do that, I'll come up with an example soon. But let's take a look at some events in the Torah, in the Bible, that discuss that you read it, you don't know that it has any connection to astrology. But in Jewish tradition, it's heavily loaded with Jewish astrology. So let's take a look on page 50. Okay, so there's a famous verse in Abraham's life story where God promised Abraham that you'll have many children. Now, why is that surprising? Because Abraham and Sarah had no children, and Abraham was already 75 years old or older at that point, and Sarah was 10 years younger. So they weren't a young couple. And so Abraham was skeptical. So God takes him outside and says, look up at the stars of the sky. So will be your children. That's the simple reading, as God was saying, you can't count the stars of the sky, so will be your children. And there's many commentaries on this piece. But one of the rabbinical traditions is actually Abraham coming to God and saying, God, I know I'm not destined to have any children. How do I know? Because that my astrological signs, I've read in the stars, and they told me that I'm not going to have any children. So my destiny is not to have children with Sarah. And God told him, go outside and look, I rearranged everything. Now you'll reread the stars and you'll see that it's fine. So that's an undercurrent of astrology in rabbinic tradition, the way the rabbis have a tradition of what happened there. Let's take a look a little. Go ahead. We have 60, 70 minutes. So hold on. Okay. Now we have another teaching. Abraham, before Abraham had a child with Sarah, she actually had a child with another woman named Hagar. Hagar was the maid, was originally a princess in Egypt. But when Abraham and Sarah went down to Egypt, and then Pharaoh sent them up to Israel with gifts, one of the things, there was the princess there said, I'd rather be a maidservant in Abraham's house than be a princess in Pharaoh's house. So he joined Abraham and Sarah back to the land of Israel. And then when Sarah said, hey, I'm not having any children, maybe you should be with Hagar, and that will be your child. And so Abraham and Hagar have a child, Ishmael. Hagar and Sarah don't get along, and eventually Hagar and Ishmael have to leave, and Sarah has a child, Yitzchak, and grows up fine. But then when Sarah dies, Abraham remarries Hagar, and the Torah tells us they had several children together. And then God tells Abraham, now send them away with gifts. So Abraham sends them away with a gift. What is the gift that he gives to them? He gives them the gift of astrology. He gives them a gift of the reading of the stars and many spiritual gifts. and they're sent away to the east. And there's a group of Indians that they believe they're a descendant of Abraham. They call him Brahm as their founding god. And it's a deep tradition of these teachings. Let's look ahead to the story of Potiphar. Last week we mentioned Joseph. One of the hints in Joseph's story was that one of the parts of Joseph's story is he lands up in Egypt in the house of Potiphar, and the wife one day starts seducing Joseph, and it doesn't end well. But who gets in trouble? Joseph gets in trouble. He's sent into, when Joseph refuses her advances, he's sent into prison. Why was the wife of Potiphar so interested in wrecking her life by being caught with the servant boy? You know, when she was going to seduce Joseph, she didn't realize how risky it is, that she's going to have she could get in big trouble. Like this, she's sleeping with the servant boy. It's dangerous. Says the commentary, the oral tradition, that the reason was she saw in her signs, in her astrology, that she's going to have descendants with Joseph. Now, did it come true? It did come true. Because at the end of the story, we read that after Pharaoh elevates Joseph, he wants to remove the stain on Joseph's name. And so he arranges a marriage between the daughter of Potiphar and Joseph. The daughter Asnas Paneah marries Joseph. And so they do have children together. Let's take a look at Pharaoh. Pharaoh is coming to, Pharaoh wants to destroy the Jewish people. So he tells the midwives, kill the Jewish babies as soon as they're born, the baby males. The midwives refuse. So Pharaoh says, okay, we have to drown all the babies in the Nile. And at first he starts with only the Jewish babies, and then he changes it. He says all the Egyptian males have to die. And then eventually he cancels the rule. So there's 3 phases in this baby genocide that he's doing. First, it's only the Jewish males. Then it's all the Jewish, all the males, Egyptians included. And then eventually it stops. Why did he decide to stop? Why did he decide to start? The oral tradition says the reason he started is because the Egyptians were expert astrologers and in the reading of the stars, and they saw that there's going to be a potential redeemer born who's going to liberate the Jewish people, destroy Egypt. But where's this leader's downfall going to come from? His downfall is going to come through water. So initially in the reading was, okay, it's male, so I only have to kill the boys. I don't have to kill the girls. It's male, and it's a redeemer of the Jewish people, so got to be Jewish. But then the astrologers say, hold on. He's raised in the Egyptian houses. He's not raised in the Jewish houses, so maybe he's Egyptian. So they include all the Egyptian babies. And then the astrologers told him, hold on, we've seen that the Redeemer of Israel has been placed in the water. So you could get rid of the decree. Pharaoh got rid of the decree. So we see, furthermore, the Jews are leaving Egypt and they're attacked by the Amalekites. This can be found on, I don't have the page numbers that you guys have, but maybe 50, 53. Astrological warfare. You see that? What page is it on?
Page 52.
52. Okay, so here, Moses tells Joshua, choose for yourself men. Choose men for us. And go out and fight against Amalek. So one of the traditions is that actually Amalek, they were using, the way they selected who should be in their military wasn't just based on strength, was based on who has a good astrological sign associated with their birth. And that's how they selected men. So Moses told Joshua, we have to counteract that. So also choose Jews to be part of your defensive brigade, Jews that have a good astrological sign. Okay, let's go. There's also a similar story with Solomon. He averts a decree, a scheme of the Egyptian pharaoh, and finally Haman. Haman determines the date of annihilating the Jewish people based on a lottery. But how does he choose the month? He chooses the month based on the fact that Adar, the month, is fish. And he said, just like big fish eat small fish, the Persian Empire is the big fish will swallow the small, the little Jewish fish, right? They felt very lucky. So remember earlier I mentioned that I asked anyone, does anyone have any Jewish customs that they know associated with astrology? So here's one example. If you have an option when to have your court date heard, the custom is to put it into the month of Adar, because it's considered lucky, extra lucky. So if you have, for Jews to do their court cases in Adar, it's considered extra lucky. Lawyers, pay attention, right? Okay, so a similar concept, a similar custom that we don't keep today because Jews are urbanized and we don't have so many dates on the calendar, but there was a custom not to do weddings in the second half of the Jewish month, except for the month of Tishrei and Elul. There's exceptions, but in general, all Jewish weddings should happen in the first half of the month, except for Lag BaOmer. There's a few exceptions. Nowadays, there's just not enough dates on the calendar, so we don't push off a mitzvah for this reason. We don't delay, but if we have a choice, I could do it in the first half of the month or the second half, and it's a matter of a few days. We try as much as possible to put it into the first half of the month. Okay.
Rabbi, why is that? What is the reason for that?
The main reason for that, and the truth is this idea that I just mentioned is more connected to astronomy than, again, the waning of the moon. That the birth of the moon represents the rise of the Jewish people, the success of the Jewish people. The Jewish people are compared to the moon. The nations of the world are compared to the sun. So we're a mirror to the nations of the world. But when in the first half of the month, it's considered an extra blessing. But it's not so that's one of the reasons. Okay. So now let's take a look at some. Till now, we refer to biblical stories, but now let's get into, but that's not really where the Jewish conversation, when you're describing the topic of astrology, it really takes place somewhere else. And that is the theological questions around astrology. So in general, there's three practices connected to astrology. The first practice is natal, is saying this person has this personality based on the hour they were born in. That's the primary astrology in the Talmud, is the hour that you were born in. Okay. Next is, look at the general constellation readings tell us that don't waste your time planting the seeds this year because there's going to be a drought. Or buy. This is the time to plant a lot because it'll be enormously blessed. So more of these global or general events, not connected to your personality, but connected to auspicious times or negative times. And finally, we have people trying to look into the future, trying to predict what will happen to me, what will happen into the future. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word, so that's why I'm not pronouncing it. If anyone wants to give it a go, is it cathartic? I don't know. Cathartic. Okay. So what do you think Judaism's stance on astrology is and why? Based on everything we read today, you might say, well, the Bible's full of astrology, so we're all good. Well, there's three things we have to address. The first is a name that is given to pagan worshipers. What are pagan worshipers called throughout rabbinic and biblical literature? They're called Ov'akum, Ovdei Kochavim Umazalot, or Mazalis, worshipers of the stars and the constellations. So when we want to refer to pagan worshipers, our main label that we put on them is that they worship the stars and the constellations. And this is paganism. This is a big no-no. What's the problem with worshiping stars and the sun and the moon? Is it because we believe in one God, which means we believe in one power, and there's no other power besides God. So, for example, if you have someone chopping down a tree, what do you say? The axe chopped down the tree or the person chopped down the tree? The person chopped down the tree using the tool of the axe. What happens when you start worshiping the axe and say, axe, please give me a favorable cutting? It's ridiculous. It's not the axe, it's the person. So to pray to the stars and the signs and say, give me good blessings, it's falsehood. But that's where a lot of pagan religions started from. It started from a foundation of, we believe that there's one creator God, but he created stars and signs, and they have stars and constellations, and they have power. God gave them that power, but once they have the power, shouldn't we say thank you? Shouldn't we show gratitude? And eventually it morphed into actual idols built as, this will be a temple where we worship Saturn, where we worship the sun, where we worship the moon. And then it said, okay, then there was false prophets that say, the sun spoke to me and said, this is what kind of food it likes, and this is what kind of practices you shall do. And slowly but surely they forgot about the creator God, and it became just a bunch of competing forces and whose God is stronger than the other. And that's where the foundation started from. So Judaism is very skeptical about anyone giving any kind of power to anything other than God. So that's one thing we have to be careful of. The next thing is, so what's Judaism's answer to this? How do we address this? Is that, first of all, that either the heavenly bodies are imbued by God with a certain nature. So just like weather, rain, clouds, it has power. It's not its own power. God gave it power. It doesn't mean we shouldn't take the weather seriously. You should decide, before I go outside, bring an umbrella. I'm not saying the rain is in control and that you should pray to the rain, but God decided there should be rain, and God decided there should be, so you have to take it seriously. So it's not necessarily a contradiction to believe in astrology and to believe, I believe in astrology, that astrology has influence on human beings and the future of the history, but I don't give it any power. I don't say that it's in charge. Another way of saying this, there's other rabbis that even this, they think it's too heretical, and they change it. They say the heavenly bodies serve as indicators of what form of divine expression is dominant. In other words, God has different modalities in how he acts with the world. The stars themselves and the planets don't have any connection to what happens in our life. Zero connection. But they're just like a watch. A watch tells you the time, but the watch does not create time. It just tells you what the time is. So too is astrology. Astrology it just shows you, it's a clock. They don't have any power or influence. What happens in the planets have no influence on us on Earth, but they are a good clock that shows us which attributes of God, when God's relating to us, how is he acting with us? Is he deciding to be very generous, or is he acting to us with holding us to a higher standard? So these are different views in how to view astrology. Either it does have power, but that power is only in the one who gave it that power is God, and they don't have any independent power of their own. Or two, there's actually no power that's coming from the stars. There's no influence that the stars have on us. They're too far away. They have no power at all, but they indicate a good clock. So let's go through some text in our book. Let's start with moments. Okay, now let us move on to a second issue that the Jewish theology takes with astrology. The second issue is the free choice principle. Let's hear from Maimonides, and we'll ask Genya to read for us from Maimonides. Text 2. You'll have to unmute the mic.
Okay. Text 2. The free choice principle. Do not entertain the thesis held by foolish people that God decreed at the time of a person's creation whether he or she will be righteous or wicked. If God were to decree that an individual will be righteous or wicked, or that there will be an insurmountable inborn quality that compels a person to a particular path of behavior, way of thinking, attributes, or deeds, as the foolish proponents of astrology imagine, how could he command us, do this, do not do this, improve your behavior, or do not follow after your wickedness? According to their mistaken conception, it has already been decreed or predetermined by the person's insurmountable nature that he or she must act in a certain way. In addition, were this to be true, what room would there be for the entire Torah? By what standard of justice would retribution be administered to the wicked or reward granted to the righteous? Shall the judge of the entire world not act justly? Genesis.
There you go. So we have three Jewish theological challenges to astrology and why you don't see it typically practiced. One is freedom of choice. If astrology has so much power over us and our destiny, then what do you want from me? I'm a Scorpio, or I'm a Mars, whatever your power is, you can't blame me for anything. So how can God? So that creates a problem with freedom of choice. When God says, do this, do that, I can't. I want to. I really want to, but I just can't because I was born in the wrong sign. Or B, which is the other side of the same coin, is reward and punishment. If we were predestined to behave a certain way, so then how can I be rewarded or punished for things that I do? What I do carries no meaning. It was already written from my birth exactly how I'll grow up and what I'll do. So how can you hold me morally responsible for things that I was programmed to do? If I was programmed to be bad, so I shouldn't be held responsible. If I was programmed to be good, I shouldn't be rewarded. That's exactly how I was programmed. Finally, what room is there for prophecy? One of the 13 principles that Maimonides writes in text 3 is it is a fundamental belief in the Jewish faith that God grants prophecy to humans, that at times when God has to communicate to us of events that will happen in the future, he does through prophecy. And we have prophets coming to us and telling us the temple will be destroyed if you don't change your ways. The famous story of Jonah, he has to go tell the kingdom of Nineveh that if they don't change their ways and don't repent, their nation will be destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah. Why do you need prophets? Why don't you just use astrology? Just use astrology and let that be the basis, and human beings will know what will be the future. Now, what do you think is the reason we don't use? What would you think is the reason? Okay, so let's take a look at how this works. So first of all, when it comes to free choice, when it comes to freedom of choice, let's look what the Torah has to say. Let's get a volunteer to read text 4. Someone in Audrey, you read for us text 4, page 57.
Regarding, right here,
Mm-hmm.
regarding astrological predictions concerning promiscuity, theft, and the like, the celestial bodies only generate an inclination and desire. Such people feel a strong attraction to theft or promiscuity, but they can restrain themselves and overcome their inclination. This is like a standard negative inclination that we all deal with. Sometimes it entices us strongly, but we can overpower it. The celestial bodies can only cause an attraction, increasing the strength of the negative inclination. God has given such people the requisite strength to overpower this inclination. People who must struggle mightily to overcome their negative inclination as a result of astrological circumstances are granted greater reward by God for doing so than people who do not feel so strongly tempted. In summary, all that celestial bodies are able to determine, according to those who believe in their power, is a desire that can be overcome.
Okay, so Rav Shira makes for us two great points. He says, even if you believe in the power of astrology, that just means that you're born with a certain inclination and personality, but it doesn't mean you cannot overcome that. And in fact, maybe that's your whole mission in life, is to overcome that inclination. And so the greater the struggle, also the greater strength God gives you, and the greater reward you get for overcoming that inclination. So in the Talmud, it says, if you're born in the astrological sign of Mars, it means you have a bloody nature. And you could be a murderer or a surgeon, right? It depends how you channel your nature. It's your choice to decide, okay, I have impulses that gravitate me towards certain kinds of situations, but let me figure out how to bend it towards a positive outlet or how to restrain it. So is there a contradiction between freedom of choice and believing in astrology? No. If you believe in astrology, astrology doesn't determine our actions. It only determines our inclination. What about reward and punishment? The same answer. That we cannot be, we get rewarded and punishment because we put in the effort. So therefore we get reward and punishment. And also nothing is predetermined. Why isn't anything predetermined? Because prayer and meritorious conduct can override an astrological destiny. Let's look at a fascinating story in the Talmud. Maddie, you read first. Text 5a, page 59.
Burning destiny. Rabbi Akiva had a daughter. Astrologers told him that she would be bitten by a snake on her wedding day and die. Rabbi Akiva was very worried about this. On the young lady's wedding day, she took the ornamental pin from her hair and stuck it into a hole in the wall for safekeeping. When she did so, it lodged into the eye of the snake, killing it. In the morning, when she pulled the pin out of the wall, the dead snake followed, attached to the pin. Rabbi Akiva asked his daughter, "What did you do to merit this?" She told him, "In the afternoon, a pauper knocked on the door, but everyone was preoccupied with the wedding feast, and nobody heard him. I stood up, took my portion of food, and gave it to him." Rabbi Akiva said to her, "You performed a mitzvah, and you were saved in its merit." Rabbi Akiva went out and taught regarding this incident. Charity will save from death.
Okay, and as Rashi summarizes, through prayer and meritorious acts, one's astrological destiny can be changed. So this is an incredible story that Rabbi Akiva went to the astrologers, or somehow the astrologers told him, your daughter's going to die on the day of the wedding. What are things we notice about, what is things that are interesting about the story? If the astrologers told him, your daughter's gonna die on the day of your wedding, what should he do? Cancel the wedding. They said cancel, call up the florist. No, he didn't do that. So we see, hold on, he's deeply worried. The story says he's worried. So if he's worried, why didn't he just cancel the wedding? Do you think canceling the wedding would work? What? Yeah, so do you think canceling, what? Right, all these movies are based on people knowing the future, and then they try to change the future, and then it makes all mess up. It doesn't work. Anyways, it's going to happen, right? You kill baby Hitler, but then you get another Hitler or whatever, however it works. But clearly, but he did do something. He prayed, and yet even the prayer wasn't enough. But his daughter's extra generosity, we saw there's a poor person, then doesn't have any food. So she said, okay, I'll give my own portion of food. She's the bride. She should be focused on herself. Instead, she's focused on giving to others. That was the merit of changing. So another thing we see, first of all, astrology only affects your personality, doesn't affect your actions, what you actually have to do. Second of all, even if when we're not talking about things connected to your nature, we're not talking about moral decisions. We're talking about making decisions about how many seeds to plant this year, or and they tell you, don't waste your money on seeds because it's going to be a bad year. Does a Jew think like that? He says, okay, the signs say it's a bad year, but I'll pray to God, I'll do extra tzedakah, and I'll have a good year. No problem. Let's go on to prophecy. Why did God give us prophecy? Why don't we just read the stars and know the future?
Rabbi, that's tautological, because no matter how it works, you did the right thing. I'll give the tzedakah, or it's the bad thing is going to happen, or it's not going to happen. So I don't understand. So why is astrology, where does that come in?
No, the story of Rabbi Akiva is showing to us that when we give tzedakah, we could change the future.
Right, but people give tzedakah, but they don't change the future. Does it only work for Rabbi Akiva? I mean, we see every Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, tefillah, tshuva, and tzedakah ma'avir in Israel hagzera.
Right, that's that
things,
principle.
But bad things still happen.
This is a very big question that you're asking, and in general, that question there's a whole book of the Bible dedicated to this question, the book of Job, why bad things happen to good people. And I gave 4 lessons from different angles throughout the past JLI courses, but it's a very good question. It's a strong question, and it's a question that Moses had and Job has. So I don't think we have a minute to give the answer. But ultimately, we don't really know God's ways. That's the summary of the answer. But yet at the same time, we believe deeply that everything that God does is for the best and for our good, and we don't always understand everything.
That's why I think the best answer is there is no answer. We can do our best, but there's no answer.
Right. Or there is an answer, but only God knows the answer.
Okay, I'll give you.
Yeah. Okay. Prophecy. Why God talks to us with prophecy. So let's take a look at the story of Potiphar. Remember that story, the wife of Potiphar? What did she see in the signs? That she's going to have descendants from Joseph. Should she have acted on that? No, because the sign is hazy. It doesn't tell you how you're going to have descendants. So whenever you decide to act based on astrology, you're getting yourself into dangerous water. Similarly, Pharaoh and his astrologers, they said, oh, here's the Jewish Redeemer is going to be hurt through water. Anyone know how he was hurt through water? God told him, I said, speak to the rock, not hit the rock. And he hit the rock to get the water to come out of the rock. And that's why he wasn't destined to live his life dream of going into the land of Israel. And so he saw the land, but he had to stay outside the land of Israel. So they read it almost right, but not right. The astrologers, even when they're trying to read, they have difficulty doing it. So to act based on astrology seems very suspect. Because first of all, you could change your destiny. And second of all, the astrological readings aren't always clear. And this is even to experts. The Egyptian astrologers were experts. Who today, right now during COVID, the business of astrology has spiked. There's billions of dollars that are being put into astrological readings. It's in the newspaper, you can read this astrology of the day. There are apps. Tremendous amounts of money are poured into this. People believe in it. People are ready to pay money in it. But they're cloudy. It's a cloudy prediction. You're reading something that it could be true, but who knows in what way it'll be true. many couples, before they get married, before they start dating, they look at their horoscopes to make sure that they're compatible. According to that, I have to be very worried because me and my wife, yesterday we checked up our horoscope and we're 81% in deep trouble. 81% deep trouble. And thank God I didn't look at my horoscope before I got married. I'm Baruch Hashem, very blessed. So again, so the benefits of prophecy is that it's clear. Astrology is not an exact science and can't be relied upon to provide an accurate picture of what will be. So let's read text 6. Joe, read for us text 6.
Astrologers chirp and do not understand what they are chirping. They mutter and they do not understand what they are muttering. Pharaoh's astrologers saw in the stars that the savior of the Jewish people would be condemned by water. So they made a decree that all male children be cast into the Nile. After Moses had been placed in the river by his mother, safely protected in a basket, the astrologers said that the Jewish savior has already been cast into the water, and Pharaoh revoked the decree. What the astrologers did not know is that the water that would condemn Moses was the episode of the waters of Meribah.
Okay, so take a moment. Okay, so take a moment on page 62 to just recognize the 3 problems that Jewish theologians have dealt with. And what were their resolution? So how does astrology, what is the conflict between astrology and free choice? What is the conflict of astrology and reward and punishment and prophecy? And what is the resolution? So to review and to see if what I tell you now matches up with what you wrote, is the problem posed by free choice is if your astrological signs have predetermined your destiny and your personality and your actions, everything that you'll do. So then where's the free choice? And how can you be held responsible for things that are already predetermined? And how can you be rewarded for things that are not in your control? And the resolution was, well, they're not really, they're just your personality, but you also have the power to overcome your natural tendencies. And that's where you get rewarded for overcoming those natural tendencies. And you could also change your destiny by prayer and by charity. And the reason God gives us prophecy is whenever he needs us to act, because we cannot act on astrology because it's so hazy. Even if you see clearly what you're reading, yeah, the Redeemer of the Jewish people will be hurt by water and it'll be raised in Pharaoh's home. All those things were true, but they just didn't know how to act because it was so hard to read, to know what they're actually reading. So if a astrologer ever tells you something terrible is going to happen to you after Yom Kippur, or something positive will happen to you after Yom Kippur, how much anxiety should you have over that? Well, first of all, you have to know, is this a legit person or a fake? Many people today that claim to be experts are fraudsters. They just know how to manipulate. So that's your first. Is this really legit? You know this person, you know they're not using any, they're not scamming you? Fine. But just because they know the future based on this doesn't mean you have to act based on that future, because it shouldn't control how you act you should always do the good thing because you have the strength within you to do the good thing. And you can always change your destiny by doing acts of Torah mitzvahs. Yeah. This is now I have 3 minutes. I have to get in a third important point. Now you know the expression Mazel Tov. You ever heard Mazel Tov? What does Mazel Tov mean? People say it means good luck, congratulations. Where does it really come from? What's the name for constellations in Hebrew? Mazal, Mazalot. We're wishing you Mazel Tov, a good astrological sign. It was given to people at birth. When you're born, they were saying good luck. So much so that many rabbis said, if you don't need to induce, don't induce. Because you're changing God's plan for your good astrological sign. God has a plan when your astrological sign should be. Don't mess with it. So don't induce unless emergency, So that's where the word Mazel Tov came from. And eventually it got expounded to all good occasions after the bar mitzvah, Mazel Tov, instead of saying Yasher Koach, congratulations, it became Mazel Tov. And at the end of the wedding, Mazel Tov. But it's this idea, okay, yeah, I believe only in one God and God's in heaven. And I try to always do mitzvahs and I don't take my astrological sign as concrete, but it doesn't mean it doesn't bear some weight. And this is a valid perspective in Judaism, and there are many books and many rabbis that have went in this path. And now, before 8 o'clock, I have to squeeze in Maimonides' position. Maimonides' position was exactly the opposite. And he went ahead and said that actually, let's read text 8, and I'll read it quickly. All philosophers consider everything the astrologers say to be false. So if you believe in philosophy, as Maimonides was a philosopher, he says astrology is nonsense, complete bogus. I know that you may search in the teachings of our true sages, in the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Midrashim, and you'll find teachings that appear to state that astrological configurations at the time of a person's birth determine certain matters. That's what we've been doing for the past half hour, reading all these Talmudic passages indicating the belief in astrology. Don't be bothered by this. One doesn't depart from the settled law in favor of preliminary discussions. Similarly, one should not reject logical conclusions that have already been conclusively proven and instead latch on to the teachings of an individual sage. It is possible that you're misunderstanding something. There may be a hidden meaning to these teachings, or it may have been stated in a response to a specific need or contemporary event. So let me break down what Maimonides just said here. Maimonides said, I know for a fact astrology has no basis whatsoever. The time of your birth means nothing about your personality. The way the constellations and the stars means nothing. It's a bogus science, it's a pseudoscience, nonsense. What about all the sages in the Talmud who were discussing astrology? And believe me that Maimonides believed in all of them. He said, first of all, just because some sages believed in astrology doesn't mean that's the consensus Jewish view. First of all, not every opinion in the Talmud is an authoritative opinion. You can have competing opinions, and one believes that it's a science and one believes it's a pseudoscience. Just because some rabbis felt it's real science doesn't make that the Jewish opinion. Second of all, not everything in Talmud is meant to be taken at face value. Sometimes passages in Talmud are using the vernacular of the day to get across a certain message. For example, rabbis today might use words from psychology, the ego, the ADHD, different labels in their speech to address certain things, OCD, think of any mental health label. Does that mean that that rabbi is an expert in psychology and has the credentials to decide if it's legit or it's made up, if the labels are real or not? No, he's trying to bring over a message with those things. So in those times of the Talmud, people were dabbling, even Jews were dabbling in the arts of astrology. So the rabbis were conveying their message with astrology. Doesn't mean they're giving an opinion. And third of all, you may be misunderstanding the gist of the conversation. So now we have a whole radical view. So there were 2 generations later, what someone did was he tried to, because there's so many teachings throughout the rabbinic writing that do point to astrology, and if you hold this as pseudoscience, you have to address all those places. So he decided to take Maimonides' approach, and so he had to re-answer and re-explain 50, 60, 70 passages throughout the Bible and Midrashim and the Talmud, and maybe even more, on how they can all be understood in a different way. Now, remember Maimonides is saying, just because one rabbi said it doesn't mean it's set of law. Well, that's what the many rabbis in Maimonides' time said about Maimonides. Just because he says astrology is a pseudoscience doesn't mean that it actually is. Actually, astrology is a valid science, and there is a valid art to it. And many of these rabbis actually studied the science and taught their disciples how to read the science and wrote books on how to spread the teaching of astrology. So in this field of astrology and Judaism, you have from one extreme to the other extreme, from those saying it's nonsense to those saying that it's completely legitimate. So everyone give yourself a round of applause for being correct, because there's someone that agrees with you. If you said, I believe in astrology, you have a stamp of approval from certain rabbis. If you said it's complete nonsense, you also have a stamp of approval. And certainly if you said it's complicated, as we've seen it today, but we're not finished yet. There's more to discuss. But let me go back to the video that we began in the beginning of the class, and we'll finish the second half. Give me a second.
God directs the world. The stars and planets do not. Does that belief sabotage astrology? A look inside Judaism's classic sources reveals conflicting opinions. Some, like the famous Maimonides, insist that the stars and planets are perfect for configuring a precise calendar, but nothing more. Others argue that God created these features of our universe to serve as useful tools. They do have an influence on us to an extent directed by God. Several classic Jewish sources deal with astrology, but today we'll take a look at the Talmud. The Talmudic sages used the Hebrew term Mazelot, which means flow or travel, because the planets journey through our skies. And they discussed 3 astrological time periods: hours, days, and months. The monthly Mazelot are the zodiac signs that alternate on a monthly basis. But here's a catch. Jewish months are lunar-based and fit a unique Torah system of astronomical calculations. So don't expect the monthly Mazelot to perfectly match the common zodiac system. But the monthly zodiacs are very rarely mentioned in the Talmud, so the rabbis couldn't have considered them overly important. Instead, they paid close attention to the hourly Mazelot. How do those work? Divide each day into 12 equal hours and each night into another 12. Each hour of the day and night is influenced by another of the big 7. Begin with the first hour of Saturday night. Put Mercury in that slot. For the second hour, add the moon. The third hour belongs to Saturn, then Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, and the 7th hour is Venus. For the 8th hour, begin the pattern again. In goes Mercury. And we keep up the same pattern all week long. It fits perfectly, so we always start again with Mercury at the first hour of Saturday night. Now, in addition to the planets rotating their rule on an hourly basis, there is also the concept of daily Mazelot. For this, we must view the day and the night as 2 distinct units of time. We then identify one dominant Mazel for the 12 daytime hours, and another dominant Mazel for the 12 night hours. Let's take Tuesday as an example. Which planet dominates the first hour of the day? That would be Mars. So Mars is the major player for that entire 12-hour period, while the others are minor players. But when night falls on Tuesday, Mars steps down from its throne. Which planet takes its place? Saturn sits at the first hour of each Tuesday night. So Saturn becomes the primary influencer throughout that night. That's how the daily Mazel works. But as mentioned earlier, the Talmudic sages focused mainly on the hourly Mazel. For example, if you wanted to discover something about your natural personality, you would identify the precise hour of your birth and take note of its dominant Mazel, which lends a whole new meaning to our responding to a birth with Mazel Tov.
So why? So now there's a verse in the Torah there's a verse in the Torah that says that you should not consult with an onen. You should not consult with an onen. Well, what is an onen? Maimonides' view was that an onen is an astrologer. And the Torah is saying, don't consult with an astrologer. Why? Because in Maimonides' view, astrology is nonsense. So you're going to be scammed. And the Torah is telling you, don't be a fool, don't be scammed. What about all the other rabbis that don't follow this position? They say that's not what onen means. And so they have other opinions. Onen means a magician. Onen means some other fake pseudoscience. But astrology is a real science. And so it's perfectly valid to consult if you wanted to. In other words, it's not the prohibition. Maybe you shouldn't do it for other Jewish values, but at least for this prohibition, it doesn't violate that prohibition. Let me read it in, or let's get a volunteer. Gail, if you could read for us text 9, page 64. This is Maimonides, how he writes it.
Ban on astrology. What is the definition of fortune telling forbidden by the Torah? This refers to a person who tries to predict auspicious times by means of astrology, saying, this day will be a good day, this day will be a bad day. It is appropriate to perform a particular task on a certain day, or this year or this month will not be opportune for this particular matter.
So according to Maimonides, astrology has no validity whatsoever. Talmudic passages indicating otherwise reflect the opinion of individual sages only. Those Talmudic passages may be a hidden, non-literal meaning, or those Talmudic passages may have been taught for external reasons. Practicing astrology is forbidden according to Jewish law, according to Maimonides. Okay. However, we have another sage that lived during that time. Remember, Maimonides lived in, if I were to ask you, who's more superstitious, Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews? Let's stereotype now. Sephardic Jews are more superstitious. Okay, here's what's interesting. At the birth of Sephardic Jewry, who is one of the primary leaders? Rambam, Maimonides, the philosopher, the skeptic. Who were some of the strongest opponents of the value of astrology? Was the Jews in France and Ashkenaz. The Tosafites, those people believed in the value of astrology, and there was a man who lived in the middle. His name was Ramban, Nachmanides, Reb Moshe ben Nachman. And Ramban, who was a very famous biblical commentator, he was always right in the middle. He was telling the Ashkenaz Jews, don't be so harsh on Maimonides. What he's saying has value. And he was always telling the Maimonidean students, what the students of Ashkenaz are making some valid points. He had a way to bring harmony to both approaches because they each have value in certain settings. So what does Ramban say? Let's take a look at. So first of all, if you take a look at page 66, for those that are believers in astrology, you'll find some comfort in this page. These are some Jewish works concerning astrology. So just take a brief a brief view, and these are some Jewish books written by great Jewish sages dedicated to astrology. And many of them had the utmost respect for Maimonides. They just didn't fully agree with him here. But let's take a look. You could go through it in detail after the lesson. Let's take a look at text 10. And this is Nachmanides, Ramban, his writing. So let's get Stan, if you can read for us text 10.
Wholehearted with Hashem. The meaning of the verse, be wholehearted with Hashem, is that we should devote our hearts completely to Hashem and trust that He alone controls everything. We should not inquire from astrologers or any future tellers, nor should we trust that their predictions will be fulfilled. If we hear any predictions from them, we should assert that everything is in the hands of Hashem, because He is omnipotent and can change the constellations of the heaven at will, negating all the predictions made by astrologers. We should believe that all future occurrences are determined by our service of Hashem.
Okay, so in Nachmanides, when he's writing, or Ramban, he tells us, maybe astrology is okay. Maybe it's a real science. Could be. But if you put too much emphasis on an astrology in leading your life, you're shortchanging yourself from a much deeper and stronger way to live your life in the present. Instead of leading your life, but what will happen in the future? Maybe this will happen, maybe that will happen. And you're constantly second guessing yourself. Should I do this? Will it help? Should I do that? Will it help? The Torah says, be tamim tia im havaya. Be wholehearted with God. What does it mean to be wholehearted? Someone who's always going to stargazers, can they be wholehearted with God? No, they're constantly split. Like maybe this is the right thing to do. Maybe that's the right thing to do. They're full of anxiety their whole life. You can't be wholehearted when you're full of anxiety about the future. You should live in the moment and trust that God has a plan and God is good and God wants you to do your best. And that's the mode you should choose when leading your life. So every moment you're in, instead of worrying about the future that you have no control over, worry about what I can do today to be more aligned with what God wants from me and to be wholesome. And so can I help someone? Is there someone that can use a phone call? Is there someone that can use a meal? Should I be taking care of my health? There's so many things we can do today instead of trying to second guess what will be in the future.
Is Ramban Rabbi Nachman?
His Moshe ben Nachman. In other words, there was two famous Moshes in that time. Moshe, the son of Maimon, and Moshe, the son of Nachman. So the Moshe, the son of Maimon, became called Maimonides in Greek, and the son of Nachman became Nachmanides in Greek. No, this is 800 years ago versus 200 years ago. Okay. So there's a truer, more meaningful way to live life, concentrating on serving God and observing His mitzvah. Astrology is inaccurate and unreliable. We know that from our weather apps. So certainly, yeah. So God is worthy of our faith. And the more power we give to astrology, the less we say, what can God do? All the suns and the stars are saying this is going to happen. Can God really change it? It creates this doubt when you give too much power to astrology. There's another point to be made. And this is actually how the Code of Jewish Law actually rules. In other words, the Code of Jewish Law written by Yosef Karo, he says, he doesn't get into is astrology real or not. He says in text 11, the Jewish practice is we do not make inquiries from astrologers. He doesn't say it's prohibited. Because remember, there are many rabbis that say it's not prohibited. When the Torah said don't seek out an onen, an astrologer is not an onen. He's just saying we do not do it because we have a much better system. And that is living in the moment and being wholehearted with God and putting our trust in Hashem. And that is the Jewish approach. Let's take a look let's take a look at text 12. Sharon, read first text 12.
He will transform the astrological destiny from bad to good.
And he's saying something very powerful. He's saying, remember before we said you have to pray and you have to do charity to change your destiny? He says, well, there's another path to changing your destiny that you don't even have to do anything. And what is it? It's a state of living. That state of living is faith and trust in Hashem. If you put your full faith and trust in Hashem, you don't have to worry at all about your astrological destiny, because God can change your astrological destiny. So if you put your full faith and trust, you have a court case coming up that's critical. So option number one, you could go consult astrologers. Will it be good? Won't it be good? What should I do? Should I hire better lawyers? Should I stay with my old lawyers? That's not the Jewish approach. You could pray and give charity. That will certainly help. But there's even a more foundational approach, which is a change of outlook, which is I'm in God's hand. God is good. Everything he does for me is good, and everything will be okay. And you may say, hey, I know someone who had that faith and it didn't happen. So we don't know the answer. We don't know the answer. We kind of live this split life. In the moment when we're looking at the future, we put our trust in God completely, that everything will be good to my eyes. It won't be good in some heavenly realm, but to me it hurts. It'll actually be good to me. That's how we live forward facing. When we look in the rearview mirror, and sometimes we see painful events and we wonder why those painful events happen to us, then we say, it must be for the good, even if I don't understand. But that's not our trust. When we put our trust in God, it doesn't mean I put my trust in God that bad things might happen to me that are really good. That's not trust in God. Trust in God is, I believe that it will be good for me in the way that feels good to me. God will make it so that it'll be good for me in a way that's good for me. There's a Jew who lives in New Jersey, but he was going through a court case. He owned a meat processing plant in Iowa. And I was in yeshiva in Iowa during this story, in that city. There was a big immigration raid on his plant, and he wasn't found guilty of any immigration things. But during that raid, they accused him of inflating the value of the plant. He believed in his innocence. He went to trial, and he had tremendous faith that everything will be good. And it came out guilty. He kept on speaking to his family, encouraging his family, everything will be good. I have my trust in God that the sentencing will be reasonable, because my lawyers are requesting 3 years. The prosecution, ridiculously, they're requesting 25 years, but I have my trust in God, everything will be okay. The judge sentences him to 27 years. He puts his faith, he's like, don't worry, we'll try this motion and I'm sure everything will be good, everything will work out. Now, I studied together with him. I knew this man, and he was a man of wholesome faith. And he wasn't just delusional that I believe in God. He truly did believe in God. He tried appealing, it failed. He tried this motion, that motion. Everything he did failed. And his lawyers came to call him and told him, there's nowhere further to go. The story's over for you. And he said, God, until now, I always had faith in you, but I also had faith in my lawyers. I also had faith in the judicial system. I also had faith. Once you took all of that away, there's only one thing left for me to have faith in. I have faith that God, you will take me out of here free. And when his lawyers, his lawyer, that was what and that's what he told his lawyer, who told him, "You're at the end of your rope." He said, "Who are you? You're not God. I believe in God." And the lawyer says, "Wow, I see real faith in front of me." The next day, the president of the United States gave him a commutation from his thing. And he walked out of jail a free man the next day. And I just remember when my wife told me the news, I was like, this is a joke. It can't be, it's impossible. Like, why would the president, this little guy in nowhere, it's not a political figure, there's nothing significant about his, but it happened. So you see that, and that's the Jewish approach, the power of real wholehearted faith. And he taught me this strategy of, in past events, we say it was for the best. And he tells me his experience in prison made him a much richer person. When he comes to a wedding, he's not on his phone. He's present because he knows what real life is all about. He says that's in the past. Into the future, he always trusts that everything will be for the best. So he was in prison for 8 years. For 8 years, and a family of 13 children. One of his children special needs. That special family. Okay, so now let's look at the Rebbe's writing to someone who asked him this question on text 13. Text 13. Miriam, read for us text 13, page 71.
Generally, astrology and the like play no part in Jewish life, as it is also written in the Holy Scriptures of the signs in heaven you shall have no fear. On the contrary, we have a commandment: you shall be wholehearted, God, which is also quoted in Jewpernatural. This means that the Jew has to have complete and wholehearted faith in God and in his influence, providence, which extends to each and every one individually. As for taking an interest in the horoscope, etc., purely as a curiosity and the like, as mentioned, this would amount to a waste of interest which should be channeled in a more productive way. For it is explained in Hasidus that God has not given man an excess of capacity, nor a deficiency of it. In other words, every person, especially a Jew, has been given a certain amount of power, concentration, all of which must be utilized in the fulfillment of his purpose in life on this earth, namely to live in accordance with the Torah and the mitzvot, and to examine justice and righteousness, etc. It follows from the above that if a person should divert any of his capacities, thoughts, and concentration on a useless thing, even if it be harmless, it is nevertheless harmful in the sense that he would thereby create a deficiency in the area which is important and necessary.
Yeah. So the Rebbe is saying, if you were coming to me and you're saying, my life has no meaning, my life is, I can waste time, why not? So is this a good waste of my time or not? The Rebbe said, I don't know. I'm not going to get into that with you, whether it's a good waste of your time or not. But it is a waste. We're at the end of the day, we have limited resources, and we have to put our wood behind the arrows that are going to knock a punch. So if we have there's money, it costs money to get your readings, it costs time. Better use that time for more important things. So that was the Rebbe's approach. Now,
then it's going to help put it to choose the way you're going to react to the situation in your job or
okay. So there's a video someone shared with me today. A guy named James Foley. He gave a TED talk where he was a scientist and doing a bunch of research, and he was doing MRI scans on different traits that different people have. And he noticed that there's a consistent way that you can detect based on their MRIs who is a psychopath. And then he wanted to test this, so he did a double-blind study, and he had to mix it up. And there was one person who wasn't in jail, that he was clear that this person must be a psychopath, but it wasn't his students put it in the wrong column. His students said, no, this person was never arrested, has a clean record, legit person. So he was so curious about this, he decided to remove the label. And whose MRI scan was it? It was his own. It was his own scan that he's a psychopath. He was busy with a bunch of other things, and a few years later, some other tests came up, and so he was in Scotland or someone, and he gave a presentation, and there were scientists in the audience, and they were saying, based on your presentation, we're doing our own study, and you have the symptoms of a psychopath. So he decided to ask all his family and friends, is this true? And what did they say? We've been telling you for years, you're a psychopath. Yeah, this is a person, good person, generally always didn't get into any serious trouble. He's a psychopath. He was wondering, I wonder if I can fool people that they shouldn't be able to tell that I'm a psychopath. This is what psychopaths do. They see how they can manipulate people. He says, I wonder if I could behave nicely and see if I can mask that I'm a psychopath. And so he started doing these micro things because he noticed that in every situation, whenever there's an option to do what's better for himself or better for the other person, what was he always choosing? What's better for himself. That's what psychopaths do. They only care about themselves. He's saying, I wonder if I could trick people and start paying attention to what would the other person want me to do, and let me do that. And he did that for a few months. And suddenly his wife's telling him, you should know, I appreciate so much everything you're doing over the past few months, the way you've totally transformed yourself. He says, but don't you know I'm a psychopath? And everything I'm doing is just because I'm a psychopath? She says, what do I care? To me, it feels good. And so ultimately we're judged on our behavior, on our actions. And that is what the Torah teaches us, that ultimately when we come to every decision to make, we should put on the lens, what is the right thing to do in this moment? So even if our personality, so maybe it can make us feel less like a failure if we say, in other words, the value of astrology, if I'm understanding correctly, is let's say you say, okay, I'm a skeptical person. Knowing that as that I'm a skeptical person, let me work on my faith, or let me work on, where your shortfalls are. But there's another Jewish principle that says that every situation that God put you in is exactly perfect and exactly what's meant to be. So that is the underlying principle. Like even when something feels hard, God gave you extra strength. So we're not saying, we're just saying you shouldn't waste your time on it. If you know it anyways, maybe why not? If you're not a Maimonides student, why not? Other rabbis say it's okay. But we're just saying there's a much better system, a much better approach. Now, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, former chief rabbi of England, he passed away during coronavirus. So he writes something, he says, everything that we just discussed in this lesson about our view on astrology should be updated to modern sciences. Many times people use labels in science as a way, exactly the same conversation of astrology, they use it in science. Let me read it in his words. He writes beautifully. He says, free will is one of the fundamental beliefs of Judaism. Maimonides explains why. If we had no free will, there would be, he says, no point to the commands and prohibitions, since we would behave as we were predestined to, regardless of what the law is. Nor would there be any justice in reward or punishment, since neither the righteous nor the wrongdoer is free to be other than what they are. So the problem is that an ancient one, but it has become much more salient in modern times because of the sheer accumulation of challenges in the belief in human freedom. Marx said history is formed by the play of economic forces. Freud argued that we are what we are because of unconscious drives. Neo-Darwinians say that however we rationalize our behavior, we do what we do because people who behaved this way in the past survived to hand on their genes to future generations. Most recently, neuroscientists have shown, using fMRI scans, that in some cases our brain registers a decision up to 7 seconds before we are consciously aware of it. So the point he's making is there are many sciences that try to predict of how a person will behave in the future and what they're most likely to do. And all Rabbi Sachs is trying to remind us is don't forget the free choice that we have to overcome our destiny and to overcome our natural predisposition and behave righteously and change our path. And finally, I'll leave you with one last Hasidic thought. There's a saying in Pirkei Avot that says, "Da malamayla mimach." Know what is above you. That means when you're walking in this world, you should always be aware of what is above you. And it's typically understood to mean you should always be aware of God. Whatever you do, have God on your mind. But the Hasidic perspective says something deeper. Da malamayla, know that what is above, mimach, is from you. Until now, we were reading, do the heavenly bodies have influence on us? Or if you're a Kabbalist, do the spiritual spirot have influence on us? The Hasidic perspective is pay less attention to what the spiritual forces have on you, and pay attention that what you do has a massive cosmic influence on the heavenly forces. Sometimes we think we're a little cog in a massive machine, and what we do makes no difference. And the truth is that God has a different lens. What we do creates massive changes above. We do one small movement, it's moving heavenly things thousands of miles. Think of a clock. The closer you are to the center of the clock, the smaller your movements are, right? But they have massive movements at the edge of the hand. That's really everything we do in life is everything we do in life has a massive change. And that's really a perspective to carry with us every moment of the day, that what I do matters. And you might say, so if I decide to get dressed in the morning or not get dressed or stay in pajamas a few minutes longer, does it really matter? You might think it doesn't matter because the whole world is doing its thing with or without you. No, it matters to the whole heavens. The whole heavens are waiting to see how you'll dance, and they'll be your shadow. Whatever you dance, the heavens are copying and imitating. So you're the one that is directing the heavenly play. So that's important to remember. And with that, we'll conclude the class with a blessing that we should all have that gift to see that in our lives every day. It's not intuitive because we have an animal soul that likes to see things in a different way, but our godly soul certainly sees it that way, and we should tune into that. Next week, lesson 3 is jinx and the evil eye. If you ever heard someone say Kainahara, poo poo poo, next week is your lesson. If you have a Hamsa, red string, next week we're going to have some fun. So we're going to watch a summary video for those that are running. It's okay. Everything we mentioned already, and you can watch the summary video online, but we'll play the lesson summary now.
Lesson 2, Stars and Signs. 1. There is strong support in Jewish sources for the basic validity of astrology, but there are also those who completely reject it. 2. Any acceptance of astrology must come with several caveats in order to be compatible with fundamental Jewish beliefs. A. Astrology cannot determine moral behavior, only natural inclinations. B. Any predicted destiny can always be overturned by God, who reacts to our prayers and good deeds. And C. Astrology is fallible. 3. Even the Jewish authorities who granted astrology some validity caution us not to turn to it for information. We should place our faith wholly in God, who's always in full control and shapes our destinies based on our actions. 4. Rather than seeing ourselves as small pawns in an elaborate cosmological system, Chassidut teaches us that we are the center of the universe, and our actions shape its course.
Okay. Everyone, you guys did it. You guys are now masters at astrology. Okay. Very good. Okay. You
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
thank you. And I'll be sending in an email tomorrow with a follow-up. And this website, myjli.com, Jewpernatural, has a lot more on every lesson. There's a lot more complimentary videos and texts that sometimes go through a whole nother angle in this lesson that we couldn't do in 90 minutes. There's always so much depth over there. So I encourage you to watch those videos. They're really nice.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Sweet dreams. Look at this. Yeah.